Good evening, class. I think what we're going to do for the second set of chapters on the exam is there's a lot of material that's contained in Chapter 6, which is memory, Chapter 7, learning, intelligence, and IQ testing, and some human development, some physical human development, such as the growth of the fetus when it's in utero, is material that you can cover, and there's not really a whole lot more I'm going to lecture on. It's going to provide a lot more insight. It's pretty cut and dry, almost dull and not boring, but pretty cut and dry material, very scientific. So I'm not going to lecture on that. I am going to lecture, however, on Chapter 8, something that I feel is critical and really the beginning of the rest of the class, which is human development and social development, something I certainly think that we need to I need to provide some more direction, some more insight, and some more depth, since this is probably most of the material that most of you thought you would be doing when you were going to take this course. So I thought I'd give you what you probably thought you were getting into. So let's go ahead and start with that. As a side note, I will be doing an exam review, despite my initial objections to doing so. I think that you guys are going to have 75 questions in 90 minutes. You're going to have to go basically at a question a minute pace. And the questions are going to be significantly more difficult on this exam. You will be taking it, be able to take it at home. But I want to provide you with some direction. I am not somebody that likes to play stump the student. The point of this, the point of this is not to stump you. It's to make sure you get the material, and I want to provide that to you and give you the opportunity to know the material that's going to be on the exam. If you are one of those students, and I don't think you are, who are going to just do the exam review, get the questions, and copy the test, and you think you're going to perform well, you won't. And I say that because, first of all, you have to review the material. I'm going to give you the questions, not the answers. You're going to have to get the answers. But the other part of that is that you're simply not going to have enough time just to look everything up. You're going to have to move pretty quickly during the test. So, all right, let's get into Chapter 8, Human Development. When we're talking about human development, we're talking about patterns of change of continuity and change over a period of time. We're talking about the human capacity of growth, the decline, our increase or decrease in abilities. When we're talking about development, please understand that our pattern of decline, whether it's our mental faculties or as we get older, we're simply unable to do the same things physically that we used to, that's still part of development when we're talking about human development. All right. When we're talking about identifying different characteristics of humans, there's two different types of characteristics we're really looking at. We're talking about genotypical or genotype and phenotypical or phenotype. When we say genotype refers to our generic heritage, something that's a genetically passed on trait. Ability or capacity for intelligence. The capacity for intelligence is not something that we're really going to increase too terribly much. It's like trying to teach somebody to throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. You can either do it or you can't. We can fine-tune it and we can get you from 90 to 95, but we're really not going to get somebody who we can't make you do something that you're genetically unable to do. Phenotype or phenotypical characteristics are something we can see. These are observable characteristics, things like height, skin color, hair color, eye color. Those are phenotypical things, phenotypical traits. You're going to hear this term. You've probably heard it a number of times, and I want to really define what we're talking about when we say nature versus nurture. In the field of psychology, if we're talking about nature, we're talking about the biological aspects or a biological predisposition or a way that you're just kind of born with, some characteristics that you're just kind of born with. It's not anything that we can really fix. You are this way or you're not this way. Nature things would be like your biological sex, and we're going to talk about sex, the difference between sex and gender later, but you're born a boy, you're born a girl. You're born with a certain temperament, and we're going to talk about the difference between temper and temperament, okay, later on. Nurture, the nurture part is we're a product of our environment. It's not that we're born this way, we're kind of a blank disc, okay? And we're a product of whether we've been nurtured, neglected, abused, or left to our own devices, okay? That would be the nurture end of the argument. So am I born a certain way or am I made a certain way by my environment? When we say the word resilience, we're talking about the natural tendency to kind of adapt, overcome, change to hardships, and kind of persevere through adversity. That's what we mean when we say resilience. You'll hear the term in this industry, in the field of therapy and psychology, all too often that children are probably the most resilient. And that is true to a certain extent. We can damage children very easily by doing certain things, but they are resilient in that they can bounce back. They're adaptable. Their whole life revolves, their very physical development, their physical existence revolves around adapting and changing. They change to different schedules. They change to how their body reacts to the environment. They change puberty. They go through a huge change, and they have to adapt to that change, both with their personality and with their physical adeptness. All right, there's a couple of different, when we're talking about domains of development, we're just talking about different areas of your life that you develop in. And there's really three that we kind of categorize. One is the physical process, obviously your physical growth. And I want you to read in the chapter because there are probably going to be several questions on the test about the growth of the fetus and this stage is this. I'm not going to lecture on that because, again, it's just going to be redundant material. Please know the physical stages of development. But the physical process and the physical domain of development deals with the changes in the biological nature of the individual, puberty, growth, again, decline. When you reach a certain age, you start to decline in your physical abilities. The second domain of development is the cognitive process. Remember, cognition or cognitive means how we think. We're talking about our growth for intelligence, thought, language capacity, acquisition. When we're talking about like Piaget's stages of development, we're talking about all his, that's a very cognitive oriented model or domain of development, because he's saying we're able to do certain cognitive functions at certain ages and we're simply unable to do them until we progress through a certain age. The last domain of development is socio-emotional. The emotional process, changing relationships, how we interact with our peers, how we deal with our emotions, how we develop or implement our value system as it relates to others, and how we interact with others. So when you hear social, think of it, it's not just my internal process, that's a cognitive. Well, social has to deal with how I'm interacting with others in my environment. Before we go any further, I want you to understand there's really kind of three different, when we're talking about childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, I want you to understand, categorically speaking, what ages we're talking about, and please know these are very important. When we're talking about childhood, we're talking through birth through age about 10. Adolescence is age about 10 through 20, early 20s maybe, and then adulthood is early 20s and beyond. So just be aware when I say adolescence or childhood, what ages we're talking about. All right, we're going to talk about Piaget. Piaget was a brilliant researcher and a brilliant theorist, and what he really was interested in initially was Jean Piaget was interested in how humans learn things, how we adapt or how we interact with our environment. And he really came up with a wonderful way to study this, and he figured who better to learn how we learn than the ones who learn the most in our environment, which is children. And what Jean Piaget said was that, based on his research, is that we learn through what we call experiential learning, experiencing it, doing it, getting out and doing it, not sitting in a classroom and listening to someone else. He said we actually get out and learning by actually doing things and watching kids. Because if you watch kids on a playground, they've got to pick things up, they've got to touch things, they've got to perform the tasks themselves. They don't watch other kids too much before they can't wait to jump in and learn that skill themselves. So he said we learn by doing things. And he watched, I think there might be a question on the exam that who did Jean Piaget study, and it's like rats or monkeys or chimpanzees, or no, it was children. He watched children, not in a creepy way. He said that there's two ways that we kind of take in new information. Okay, we're born with, we've talked about schemas before and what a schema is. A schema is just a framework with which I approach a problem. A particular schema, for example, a way to describe what a schema is if I were to ask you, tell me about what drugs are, okay? And your schema for drugs, something you might say is, well, they're bad, they're illegal, they're bad for your body, you could get addicted to them, you can get arrested, things like that. So just by saying the word drugs, you have a framework with how you approach that particular topic. That is called a schema. All of those things I listed. And they can be different for different people, even on the same topic. Some people might go, drugs are great. But when it came to taking in new information, we already have the particular schema. So Piaget said we have to either assimilate or accommodate for new information. Assimilation means to incorporate new information into existing knowledge. So if I said, describe a ball to me, most common responses I get from students are, okay, well, it's round, it bounces, kids play with it, things like that. And then I'll pull out a football and I'll say, this does not fit the description you gave me. I said, can we play with it? Yes. Can it bounce? Yes. Is it round? No. So you have to assimilate the new piece of information that a ball does not have to be round, that it can do all those other things, but it can also be this. And that's assimilation. It's taking in and melding new information with old. Accommodation means I have to adjust or change my existing schema for new information. So, for example, if you find out you have diabetes, okay, you have to make a change to your lifestyle. You can't just take in new information and use that with your existing. I can no longer eat certain things, or I have to take certain medicine, or I have to exercise more, or there's things that I can or cannot do, so I have to change my lifestyle. That would be accommodating my behavior or the information to change my lifestyle. All right, Piaget's stages of development. Many of you went through these, and I was really pleased, generally speaking, with a lot of the answers that you guys gave. I should have been more clear. I did want you guys to use an entire model, not just one stage, and that's my fault. Many of you made the similar assumption and just picked out one particular stage. My question wasn't clear enough. I wanted you to use Piaget or Erikson or Kohlberg or whatever. But the answers that you guys gave me were very spot on, so I was proud of you guys. The first step in Piaget's stages of development is birth through age 2, and it's called the sensomotor stage. And the sensomotor stage just means that as infants, children learn through, just like we talked about, experiencing. You'll see a baby in a high chair, okay, and the mom will come over and the mom will set a bottle down in the high chair and then walk away. The baby will grab the bottle, pick it up, hold it over the side of the high chair, and the baby's not looking at the bottle. The baby's looking at mom, and the baby will drop it. And mom will turn around and, oh no, and come over and pick the bottle up and go, don't do that, honey, and put the bottle down. The baby will invariably pick the bottle up in the other hand, take it to the other side, and drop it. Mom will say, oh no. What the baby's doing is they're experimenting with coordinating their motor experiences, and what they're figuring out is that they can manipulate their environment. And they find that very fascinating at that stage. I'm this little thing, and I can make mommy move. I did that. And that's kind of what they're experimenting with in that sensor motor stage. It has to do with their physical being and touching things, and babies pick things up, and where do they stick them? Right in their mouth. Boom. Everything. Doesn't matter what it is. And that drives parents. It's the most panicky stage for a parent to be in. In this stage, babies also struggle with object permanence. And here's what object permanence is. We'll have a baby, and there's a picture in your book, I think, but here's really what it is. We'll set the baby down and have this block in front of them, and we'll have a train go behind this side of the cardboard. And what we're trying to see is when the object disappears, does the baby still understand that that object exists? It still exists even though I cannot see it. If the baby is still, the train goes in this side of the the block, sorry, low tech here. If the train goes in this side of the block and the baby's still looking where the train went, the baby is still aware, even though I can't see the train, that they expect it to be somewhere else. Okay, that object is permanent. Here's what a lot of mothers or parents don't like to hear. When the baby is first born, and you have a newborn baby a few weeks old, when you get up and leave the room, the baby is completely unaware that you even exist anymore. When you come back, they can recognize you oftentimes, but they're unaware that you even are in existence when you're not in their field of sight, because they haven't resolved that object permanent stage yet. We're going to talk a little more about babies and facial recognition here in a few minutes. Stage 2 for Piaget is the preoperational stage. This is between ages about 2 and 7. And this is very simple, symbolic thought. The world's represented in words, images, drawings. Art therapy is a huge part of working with kids in the preoperational stage, because they're very poor communicators of their thought, of organizing their thoughts first of all, and then they're even worse at communicating what their thought process is, if they're even able to, especially if they're in the younger ages, 2, 3, 4 years old. Okay, but they're very expressive physically. They make decisions based on feeling rather than logic, which is what we have to coach them to not do. Even as an adult, when we're making a decision based on an emotion, it is usually an incorrect response. We have to table our emotions, think logically, and then make a decision. Kids at this age between 2 and 7 in the preoperational stage are very what Piaget called egocentric. Ego meaning me, centric meaning the world around me. So I am the center of my world. They don't take the mental states or thought processes of others into account in this stage. In other words, if you've ever had this happen, for any of you who are parents or had a lot younger, been around kids for any period of time, you're watching television in the living room, and you have one child, by the way. In the other room, you hear a lamp break, and running in from the other room comes your child, who cannot wait to give you an explanation of what happened, even though you have no clue what happened, because they think everything that they know, think, and feel, everybody knows, thinks, and feel. They can't imagine that somebody else has a different thought process or experience than they do. That's what egocentric means. The concrete operational stage is from about age 7 through 11. And this starts where kids really start using more logic rather than intuitive or kind of emotional or gut feelings. They start classifying things as in groups. If you'll notice, before age 7, if you watch kids on a playground, boys will play with girl toys, girls will play with boy toys. Everybody kind of is in a melting pot. But right around 7, 8 years old, kids really kind of start segregating themselves into groups. The athletic kids will go play the athletic games. You kind of start seeing the really pre-high school groups. You know, what we would categorize as kind of the nerdy or the tech kids will hang out, the sport kids will hang out, the drama kids will hang out, et cetera, et cetera. So they really start grouping things. You'll hear a lot more language too. That's a boy toy. That's a girl toy. The last stage is the formal operational stage. This is age about 11 through 15. And this is where abstract thought means I'm having an idea that I'm not just kind of regurgitating that somebody else said. I'm kind of coming up with kind of a new or different or higher level thinking by myself without being guided. Abstract thought develops. Even more logical approaches to problems and new problems certainly develop at this stage, and kids become what we call little lawyers. They look for loopholes in logic and parents' logic, and they're really good about finding gaps in our logic. They compare things to how they are versus how things should be based on the value system that's been implemented at home and at school. They certainly start to use hypothetical and deductive reasoning, where we haven't really kind of given them a solution, but they're using logical thinking to kind of make inferences. The next researcher, being Russian myself, Govolov is actually my last name. You're going to hear a lot about Russian psychologists. There's a lot of them that have made a lot of contributions to this field. Lev Vygotsky is one. And being a socialist kind of a culture where the mentality, as it is in a lot of countries around the world, is very socially based. It's out in the Western culture, the individual is more seen as more important than the group, and the group is more important in a lot of cultures around the world. And the Russian culture is no different. Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist that came up with this idea that he called scaffolding. And if you think scaffolding is that construction, all those different tiers and plank and walkways of construction that goes up around like high-rise buildings or bridges or whatever that are under construction. And he called it scaffolding because he says that we develop as humans by modeling the next level of development ahead of us. So think about how Little League baseball players are going to get better. Okay, Little League baseball players are going to get better because they're looking up to high school baseball players. And high school baseball players are going to get better because they're looking up to collegiate. That's what they want to do. That's their next goal is collegiate player, and collegiate to minor league, and minor league to pro, and so on. The Little League player, while they do understand that there's a pro, there is a kind of an end goal here, they're not really modeling so much their behavior after the pro. They're modeling their behavior after the next level above them, because that, according to Vygotsky, is what's going to pull you through the developmental stage. We're not going to yank a kid from Little League to pros. That never happens. Okay? He talked about, Vygotsky also was talking about crystallized versus fluid thinking. Crystals are very hard, and they're very difficult to change the structure of. So crystallized thinking, we would think of, the best example I can give you is the old guy on the porch. The old guy on the porch. And the old guy on the porch would be like, when you've lived on this earth as long as I can, then you can tell me something. So that's where we get wisdom, by the way. Wisdom as opposed to intelligence. Wisdom is practical knowledge of the real world, while not necessarily applicable in an academic setting. So it's just kind of life experience. Fluid thinking is what you guys all, utilize on a daily basis, hopefully. Adaptability, flexibility, willing to accommodate or assimilate new information, and use that to kind of grow and develop intellectually. Okay? Temperament. What is temperament? Temperament is a behavioral style and a characteristic way of responding to our environment in different situations and people. There was a piece of research back in 1977 by researchers Chess, Stella, and they categorized really 3 different types of kids and 3 different temperaments in kids. There was the easy child, who has a very positive mood and has the regular routines come very easy. Getting up in the morning, brushing their teeth, honey, come, put your video games down and come to dinner, and shifting from the child's agenda to the parent's agenda. In that example, video games to come to dinner is very easy and no problems. You have the difficult child who's constantly fussy, frequently cries, has an irregular routine, or can't seem to establish a routine to get any kind of behavioral semblance. And then you have the slow to warm up child. The slow to warm up child we always kind of are very concerned about. They're very cautious. They're really withdrawn. Oftentimes categorized as irritable, have very low activity levels, and that's the slow to warm up child. It's not that is pathological or harmful to the psychology of an individual necessarily, but it's certainly something that we have to monitor. And temperament, you are born with a particular temperament, okay? Your temper is how you react or how you utilize your temperament. So I might be born with a very hot temperament. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, while my brother, that might not bother him so much. Somebody cuts me off, he's like, who cares? He has a cool temperament. I might have a very hot temperament. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, I want to show them a particular finger. I want to tell them exactly where they can go. Might want to honk my horn. Those are all instincts. I can't really kind of fight. I can fight my instinct, but I can't control how I feel initially in a snap decision. It's an impulse, okay? That's temperament. Temper is, do I run that thought process and my temperament through a filter and react to it? Okay, I utilize coping skills. I calm myself down. I go, oh, just let the dude go. I don't want to get in a fight, all this stuff. So that's more of temper, how I handle it. Also involved in temperament is we monitor very closely the infant's attachment to the mothers versus the fathers, who they tend to attach to. And this is where we're coming back to when the mom leaves the room. Infants, newborn babies, recognize female faces. Their vision, remember, they're still developing their eyes and different connections neurologically. So their vision isn't very good. They're not very good at detail. They're good at general shapes. So they can tell a woman from a man, but they can't tell one man from the next, generally speaking. Okay, so dad as opposed to his brother or grandpa, they're not going to be able to tell the difference too easily. They can't necessarily tell most women from most women. However, they can tell mom from other women for some reason. And we attribute that in large part to releases of oxytocin, which is what we call the love hormone. And that's more prevalent. Oxytocin, higher levels of oxytocin is usually present in in new mothers. So we also talk about attachment theory. Attachment theory is something that I utilize to assess social dysfunction or family dysfunction, on a routine basis. And there's 4 categories to attachment theory. There's 2 columns, and there's 4 possible outcomes. Secure versus insecure. Secure meaning I have formed a solid, stable, healthy relationship. Insecure, I develop distrust in this category of relationship. The 2 categories are individual and social. Okay, so individual and social. And then I have to either resolve secure or insecure in each one of those. So 2 columns, secure or insecure, which means I can have secure, 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 insecure, insecure, secure, and insecure, insecure. Okay, you can just put 2 columns in SI, S, or IS, whatever the combinations are. And what that means is when we're talking about individual or what we call dyadic just means one-on-one. When we worry about insecure dyadic attachments, we're talking about usually the primary caregiver, usually the biological parent, but not necessarily. Oftentimes people are raised by someone other than their biological parent. That's okay. We're talking about the primary caregiver. Okay? Are your needs fulfilled as an infant or as a toddler? I'm hungry, you feed me. I'm scared, you provide me security and comfort. I'm crying because I'm scared, you nurture me and protect me. If those needs are met, the basic core needs are met, then you've developed a secure dyadic or individual attachment. Social, I go to school, I reach out to my peer group and I say, hey, my name's Joseph, what's your name? If my peers reject me or I'm not getting any kind of nurturing experience from my social groups, I go play baseball and I'm not very good at baseball and my team kind of makes fun of me because I'm kind of awkward physically. I don't trust those relationships. It makes me nervous about reaching out to other peer groups. I've developed an insecure social attachment. Different theorists within that utilize attachments theory say that we have to have our attachment to individuals satisfied in both of these areas, both in dyadic and in social development, in order to develop a healthy adult lifestyle. We'll move on to Erikson's stages of development. I'm going to briefly describe each of these, but I have to tell you, and a lot of you already know based on my responses to the discussion board post this week, this one's my favorite. And I didn't want to say that and influence your writing, because there is no right or wrong answer. It's just kind of a preference. Now, as a therapist, this is the one I identify with. The reason I do is because I feel that this has many more stages than just 4. First of all, one of the criticisms of Piaget's stages is that you'll notice it ends at age 15. And what Piaget is really saying, according to the critics, is that we stop developing at age 15. There's nothing that happens after 15 as far as development happens. And we just really know that to be untrue. Now, I know Piaget is kind of a cognitive development, but I still think there's other things that happen after that have to do with our cognitive processes. Erikson is more of a social stage of development, and I think it addresses many more issues. So, let's go through them. Trust versus mistrust. Okay, this is birth from when you're born to about 1 year. This is going to sound really similar to the attachment theory. This really is established. This is all about trust and hope and expectations for the future. All right. So I cry because I'm hungry. You feed me. I'm cry because I have a dirty diaper. You change me. I'm scared. You nurture me. I have my basic biological needs that I communicate, and the only way I know how is usually through crying or through touch. And we establish those connections, those trust connections, through contact, through physical contact. People that don't pick up and hold their babies on a routine basis, that just kind of feed them and let them sit in a chair the whole time, develop very secure or a lack of trust in this stage. The great majority of problems that I have with social dysfunction in patients, I can track back to this stage. The great majority. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Autonomy means my ability, or I have authority, I have control. Okay, I make the decisions a little bit. Just physical control. This happens from, again, about age 1 to age 3. This has to do with willpower, my ability to develop new physical skills, to demand more choices, to make choices, not just have somebody make decision for you. Anybody that's got a 3-year-old and you tell them what to eat for dinner, they want to choose what to eat for dinner. Okay? Next stage, ages 3 to 6, is initiative versus guilt. Does the child have some sense of purpose? Can they organize activities? Can they perform tasks as demanded? This is where they certainly assert more aggressiveness and initiative, and they take things. This is a stage where harsh parental criticism can lead to guilt. Guilt is an unnatural emotion, by the way. It's an unnatural feeling. It's not something that generally naturally occurs, and we have to be taught, because here's what guilt is. Guilt is not just feeling bad because you did something. It's you did something, somebody else had to tell you you shouldn't have done that, and not only shouldn't have done that, now you should feel bad about doing that. So guilt is a socially constructed kind of state of being. The next is ages 6 through 12. This is industry versus inferiority. A lot of the kids that I work with have really struggled in this stage because they're dealing with social disorders or behavioral disorders, and here's what this means. If I'm industrious, the industry part of this means I can do things. Kids, the great part of what kids do is place their self-esteem, their self-worth, their self-value is really based not on their level of achievement, it's their comparison to their peer group. So I go out on the playground and I can see that kids are climbing monkey bars and they're able to swing across with using their hands, and that they can play football, and I can't do any of those things. And I understand that I'm the same age as they are, and from a very basic logical standpoint, remember Piaget's stages here, I'm their age, they can do all these things, I can't do those things, and I should be able to do those things, therefore they have greater value than I do. That's the inferiority. I do not place as much value on myself as the others do. And the other kids start to do that too. They're happy to let you know, you can't play football, we don't like you, or whatever it is. So failure to master these tasks or the school skills leads to a sense of inferiority, therefore social withdrawal. And oftentimes it's either social withdrawal or aggressive behavior. They start to aggress. Ages 12 through 18. identity versus role confusion. Boy, all I have to say here is high school, because I think that really summarizes identity versus role confusion. We've talked a little bit about do I put myself as a fidelitous or honest individual? That's part of it. But more than that, it's where do I see myself? Where's my place in society? Where's my place in this world? This is where kids really are popular about tagging themselves. I'm a jock. I'm a band member. What do you do? What are you into? Oh, I'm a drama guy, or I'm a nerd. Whatever it is, whatever category they place themselves in, that's their identity. When kids have a hard time identifying themselves into a particular group, when they really don't feel like they fit into different roles, again, this causes, it's not so much an inferiority, it causes them a lot of frustration, depression, anger, frustration, because we're social creatures by nature. Humans are, and we have a deep-seated desire and need to connect with our peer group, as we talked about in the attachment theory. The next stage is ages 18 through 30. This is intimacy versus isolation. Really, we're talking about, this is the stage where we're developing our relationships or love. This is where many people become parents, so they develop their identity or their intimacy. When we say intimacy, we're not necessarily talking about sex. We're talking about closeness and relationship with another individual. People who have a hard time fall into depression, substance abuse, when they fail to resolve or fail to find a mate or an intimate social pair at this stage. The next is generativity versus stagnation. I'll define that because some of you may be unfamiliar with those terms. This is age about 30 to what we call old age. It's a vague term. Generativity means from one generation to the next. My grandparents to parents, parents to my children. Generations. So generativity versus stagnation. This is where people start to feel that they're going to care. They rear their children, discipline, raise their children. They focus on their occupational achievement, their career status. They're also training the next generation. So it's passing something on to the next generation. I was a professional baseball player, and now I'm passing my baseball skills on to my son. And that's the Koala family legacy. So passing something on, acknowledging that my time, I'm moving on to my next life stage and it's time for someone else. Old age. This really doesn't require a whole lot of explanation, but I'm going to give it anyway, I think. I think this is pretty common sense. Integrity versus despair. When we're talking about integrity, we're talking about someone's wisdom, someone's sense of personal satisfaction, gratification, achievement. We're talking about integrating all these earlier stages into kind of what did my life mean? And if people look back and they can go, I had a good life, I had a good career, I did a lot of things I wanted to do, I had a good family, and I'm very happy and very pleased. That's somebody with a lot of integrity. I was an honest individual. I had a happy life. Somebody that looks back and doesn't develop that sense of self-acceptance really has a sense of despair. I wasted 70 years of my life, and now it's coming to an end. They're faced with their own mortality, and depression sits in. And it's really hard to resolve that, because I can't have someone that's coming into therapy that's dealing with depression, that's in an old age stage of life, and I can't go back and relive their life. So we have to really work with what they do with the rest of their life. Okay? So those are the stages of Erikson's, and I use those. I can't really emphasize this enough. I use these every day because people who are coming into therapy, it's usually very easy for me to kind of see where they're at, what they're talking about, what their problems are, and where they have failed to resolve one of these stages: industry versus inferiority, generativity versus stagnation, whatever it is. So I find it to be a very helpful model, and so do the patients. The patients really can understand, God, yeah, I can see how that could really help. The other part that it helped, the other reason I find it helpful is because once we identify the stage as far as therapeutic intervention, once we find out where the deficiency lies or where they failed to resolve a stage, it really kind of is very easy to point to possible solutions, isn't it? You don't feel connected to your peer group, so I would look at this versus identity versus role confusion. You feel very isolated. Let's find people who are like-minded with you. Maybe whether it's group therapy or we're going to find you a sports team or a softball team or whatever. We're going to get you connected with your peer groups. Then we start exploring options like that. So it really kind of sets the table for solutions, not just identifying the problem. All right, another technique that I use when we're talking about development and working with kids and parents is the different parenting styles, and there are four. Authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and neglectful. I'll start off with the easy two. The neglectful is obviously I'm just not around. A lack of interest or involvement, which develops kids. It's kind of like, I don't care, just stay out of my hair, go whatever. Or you just never see the parents around. Neglectful parents can also be the parents that are dealing with substance abuse, alcoholics, drug users. It's neglectful because they're so wrapped up or unable because of being in an altered state, that they're neglecting the interests of their children. And not just, they have food and they have a roof over their head. No, you're neglecting their social needs. There's more needs than just feeding and housing and educating a kid. Not to mention you're providing a horrible model for your children's behavior, because your children will become a great part of you despite your best efforts. Children that are from neglectful parents, we know what they look like. Okay, they usually have a poor self-worth. They feel that the parents, that no matter what the situation was, whether it was intentional or unintentional, I didn't come before anything else in my parents' life. I did not garner the attention. The drugs did, or jail did, or work did, or whatever did. Okay? They're certainly less socially competent. They didn't have anybody that was their primary caregiver around to provide them with self-control, independence, trust, love, nurturing. Someone wasn't around to provide those examples of. And children can't repeat behaviors that they haven't been taught. None of us can. We have to be taught these things by somebody. The permissive, I hope you'll forgive me for using this term when I'm describing the permissive, but it's really the easiest one I think that you can all wrap your head around, is the soccer mom. Okay? This is you're 16? You're 16 years old, sweetheart, and you want a kegger for all of your friends? Oh, absolutely, and I'll make sure your dad and I leave you alone and let you guys have sex and you can smoke pot and do whatever you want, but as long as you're happy. And that's an exaggeration to make a point, but a lot of parents do that. They're they allow their children to do things that are illegal or illicit, same thing. They allow them to do things that don't help their development either physically. They allow kids to eat, even though the kid is already obviously grossly obese, they allow their kid to eat ice cream and chocolate, and that's not good for the kid. It's not a good pattern for the child to learn. It's not a good message to send to the child. And not because it's not a body image thing, it's a health thing. High blood pressure, cholesterol, etc., etc. So those are permissive parents. There's few or no limits on the child's behavior, despite the potential harm socially, sexually, physically. Okay. These kids, permissive kids, turn out to be, they have poor social acceptance because they haven't learned limitations or how to deal with people properly. They have poor self-control, very spoiled. All right. Then there's the authoritarian parent. Okay, this parent very much limits and distances the exchange between the parent and child. This is the my way or the highway, because I said so, that kind of parent. These kids, while they do follow the rules, they usually do follow rules, they still have very poor social skills because they haven't learned how to nurture relationships. And when I talk about nurture, I don't want you to think that I'm going the I'm okay, you're okay route. Okay, I'm just talking about nurturing relationships, giving attention to someone else, and you give attention to me, and I give attention to you, in a positive way, all right, where I understand you and I'm willing to do what it takes to whether it's friends or obey the structure of the parent-child relationship, whatever it is. So they have poor social skills. They have poor initiative. They don't get up and do things on their own because they should. They're usually told what to do all the time. They measure value in relationship to other people. They don't do it because I have value because I'm a good person and I'm smart and I try hard. They're usually being compared to other people. You're not as smart as your brother. Get up and do what he's doing. So they measure their value as opposed to others out of habit. Then we have the authoritative parents. The authoritative parents do have extensive dialogue between the parent-child is permitted to a point. We're not saying you have to explain yourself to your child, but it encourages them to be more independent, but in a nurturing way. So we have a parent, child wants to, we have a 15-year-old who wants to go to a kegger or a party, and the authoritarian parent would go, get your ass in your room. You are not doing that. No. Why? Because I said so. Okay? And there's no real learning that is occurring there. It's just an application of a rule, which is why they have poor social skills. The authoritative parent would be, honey, look, it's not that I don't want you to go to parties. I want you to do those things. This is inappropriate. First of all, it's illegal. I could get in trouble by allowing you to go to this party. There's nobody around. So the older a child gets, you're explaining the rules and why they have to follow rules a little bit more. They're allowed to ask questions, and you're allowed to respond in a nurturing way to a certain point. I'm not saying, again, you have to explain yourself, but it's important for a child, especially as they get into 14, 15, 16, 17, for them to understand. Again, this is a learning opportunity for parents. They have to understand why the rule is being applied, so they can take that into them being an adult. Think about how you would want them to respond to their child, not just you responding to yours, or how you would want your parent to communicate with you should you be in their shoes. Very helpful tool. I'm not going to go over too much on Marsh's identity theory. I think it's pretty explored in the book. It's really a 2-question model that leads to 4 possibilities. There's a little grid in there, and it's yes, no, that kind of thing. If you have any questions on this, please email me. I don't want to spend too terribly much time on this because I'm afraid it's just going to be a little bit redundant. I did want to talk about the importance when we talk about whatever model we're using to apply for whether it's assessment or diagnosis of problems or whatever it is within the field of psychology. There's one component that seems to be growing at an exponential rate, and that's the cultural influence on social development that we have. You're going to hear a lot of different models start to incorporate a cultural aspect because we have to understand that normally when we're talking about norms, this population, 32% of this population does this, or 70% of that population does that. We're usually talking about the United States, okay, generally speaking. However, we do have to understand that the United States is a melting pot and that we're becoming increasingly more diverse. So it's unrealistic, even within our own culture, to just kind of generalize too much. We have to talk about the geographical or where you're at located in the United States, and then the makeup of that particular region. It does make a difference. For example, I'm not going to break all these down, but I really do want you to think about the different value systems that are placed on home life and the structure of the home. Is it egalitarian or husband and wife? Egalitarian means husband and wife are equal or equals. Or is it the husband's the head of the household? Or the wife is the head of the household, as it is in many cultures? Values placed on work. Values placed on social expectations or social values. And here's what I mean. I'll do a couple of these. In the United States, if I was to ask you, describe a Californian, you're probably going to think they're the surfer guy. What's up, dude? That kind of very laid back, very no pressure, very image conscious kind of a person. That's a common stereotype, but it's a stereotype that's based out of reality. That really is, it's a very slow paced culture. We talk about Texas. And I can just say the word Texas, and you probably think of cowboy or ranchers or farmers. I did my graduate work at University of Houston Clear Lake. I can tell you that's a pretty accurate description of life in Texas. Like 9 out of 10 people are carrying guns. It's a carry state. They carry them all around the place, and it was something coming from New York and California that I was very unused to. It was very unnerving for me to be in that culture, and it influenced my behavior. Being a New Yorker, it was weird to be in the United States, to move to New York from California, where you could live next to your neighbor for 30 years and not know his name. In New York, everybody kind of knows everybody. Everybody's packed in like sardines there, and you're kind of on top of each other. Even though you know them, you still don't talk to them. It was a really aggressive type of culture as compared to California, because California, everybody's kind of like, hi, they'll pass you and have that cordial greeting. You don't really say hi to strangers in New York. You look like a tourist, they'll look at you like it's very odd. And then think about the culture and how those 3 different geographic regions I described are different than life here in Indiana. The reason why cultural influences on social development are very important, because it influences your behavior and how I interact or how I choose to not interact with other people based on the expectations of my environment. So they can be very different. Then think about the expectations placed on other countries: India, China, Italy, Australia, Middle Eastern cultures. All right, all of those are very different value systems. What comes first? Home life, work. Work comes first in a lot of cultures where families, the same value is not placed on family as it is here. All right, we're going to talk about gender development now, and there's a huge difference, and I want you to understand there's a huge difference between sex and gender, and let's talk about that. When we talk about sex, we're talking about the biological characteristics of sex: penis, vagina. So when we say sex, male, female, okay? The difference between sex and gender is sex is my biological, gender is how I identify myself. My sex might be male, but my gender might be maybe transgender or female. Maybe I feel like a woman trapped in a man's body. I totally don't. Just an example. So gender is the social and psychological identification of being male or female. Okay. Things that we talk about when we're talking about gender development are androgens and estrogen. Androgens are the primary sex hormone. Okay, we're going to talk about primary and secondary sex characteristics in a minute, but women have estrogen. Estrogen is the primary female hormone that triggers biological changes. Okay. A primary sex characteristic, when we're talking about primary sex characteristics, are your genitalia, your sexual organs, penis, vagina, things like that. All right? Your secondary sex characteristics are things that, your secondary sex characteristics are things that change with puberty. That's the easiest way I can put the example to you. Pubic hair, lower voices in men. We're not born like this. We develop this as a secondary characteristic. Facial hair, muscle mass. You go see young men who go through puberty. They grow in muscle mass very quickly. Enlargement of breast tissue in women, widening of the hips. These are all secondary sex characteristics. Okay. When do we identify ourselves as male and female, and developing sexual preferences and things like that? This is where I'm going to deviate. I'm going to put a little bit of, this is my opinion in here, but this is my class, so I get to give it. As a therapist and a practitioner, and somebody who deals a lot, and I've worked for the LGBT community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. I worked at the Lambda Archives, which is the LGBT archives, their historical archives in San Diego when I was doing some undergraduate and graduate work at San Diego State University. So I've worked with this population a great deal, and I hear some things that are invaluable, some invaluable tools about the culture of the LGBT culture and things and challenges that community goes through. And it's incredible. It's disturbing, but incredible, and a heck of experience. And I'm very thankful to have had it. I work with LGBT population here as well. There's one thing that I hear that is kind of disturbing, and I hear this oftentimes, and I'm going to explain why I think it is said. I'll hear oftentimes, I knew I was gay when I was 3, or all my life since I was 5. And here's why I think that is an untrue statement. I think it's a social statement to say that I'm born this way and it's not a choice. That I can certainly appreciate, okay? I don't think that anybody knows that they're gay or straight when they're 3 or 4 or 5, because nature is a pretty clever creature. There's a natural process that we all go through where we develop our sexual preferences, our sexual appetites, what we like, what we don't like. It's a natural biological process called puberty. Now, while I am not in the LGBT community, I'm a straight male, but I was 5. I was 3. I interview parents, and I've done a lot of interviews with people who are straight and ask them, did you know if you were straight or gay when you were 5? And the answer is a resounding no, because there's not an interest. There's not a sexual appetite when you're 3, 4, 5. I do think there is an environmental component. I don't think it's strictly biological. I don't think it's strictly environmental. I think it can be either one of those. I think it can be both of those as far as what your sexual preferences are. I think it's exposure to certain material at a certain age when you're predisposed to be taking in or acquiring or assimilating or accommodating information about sex and sexual preferences and appetites and identity and things like that. So it's a mishmash. I don't think that there's one clear-cut answer for that. All right, we're going to move on to Kohlberg's theory, and we're almost done here. Kohlberg's theory, and this is in your book, is basically a question of morality. And he says that there's really 3 ways to answer this: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional thinking. The morality question is basically this. There's a man and his wife, and the wife is diagnosed with this terminal disease. And this disease is definitely going to kill her. However, there's a company here in town that just produced a new drug that will save her life, and it will save her life. However, it is immensely expensive, and there is no way this man can afford the drug. His insurance won't pay for it. He can't even borrow enough money to pay for it. So the man decides to steal it. And here's the question. Is it okay for him to steal the medication? Pre-conventional Kohlberg, according to Kohlberg's theoretical model, pre-conventional thinking says that the focus is primarily on the consequence of the behavior. Social laws are the primary focus here. It's illegal. According to pre-conventional thinking, the man should not steal it because it's against the law. Period. End of story. Conventional thinking is a little bit different, a lot different, in that it says that social rules and laws are considered, but mainly the familial impact or the family's impact and values are focused on. What is this individual value? What is the values that's been placed on him? What would a good husband do? What would a good father do? And this is a very individualistic question. One family or one individual might say, I was always told that you're a member of society and that's greater good. That doesn't belong to you, so you don't take it, no matter what the consequences are. That's a value decision, okay? You might be, some of you might be thinking it's a legal issue, but that's still a value decision that you've placed the laws above your family. That is still a value. My value might be family comes first, and there's no way that this guy's profit margin is more important than my wife. That's my personal value. Post-conventional thinking would say that there's an alternative moral course and an increasingly personal moral code that I don't really care. It's irrelevant to me. My personal moral code is family, and that's all. Nothing else matters. All right. We'll move on to social behavior. And really all I'm going to talk about in social behavior, and then we'll wrap this up with Kubler-Ross. Social behavior, we're talking about pro-social and antisocial. Pro-social behaviors are behaviors that benefits those around you, opening the door that benefit other people without benefiting yourself. Okay, a pro-social behavior would be opening the door for someone and holding it open, or somebody drops some money, you pick it up and you hand it back to them. Being polite, please and thank yous are pro-social behavior. Antisocial behavior is something that is harmful or irritating to those around you. Okay, driving down the street, putting your windows down, and cranking your music to an uncanny level is irritating to those around you. So just so everybody else can hear what kind of music you're listening to. That's antisocial behavior. It doesn't have to be illegal. It just has to be irritating or violate a social contract. Kubler-Ross, stages of dying. We'll end up with this today. The Kubler-Ross stages of dying really has to do with, there's 5 stages, and I'm going to attach a YouTube video. It's only like a minute and a half long. It's very funny. It's from the series Robot Chicken, but it nails. I saw this and went, Kubler-Ross's stages of dying. How perfect is this? So I want you to watch the YouTube video, because when it comes time for the exam, you will not forget it. Please watch it. Kubler-Ross says the stages of dying that we go through, there's 5 psychological defense mechanisms that we go through to help us deal with death or loss. The first one is denial, then anger, then bargaining, then depression, then acceptance. Excuse me. The funny thing about this is that the first 4 stages are all designed to keep you from the 5th stage. Okay. Kubler-Ross said originally established this as to deal with death or bereavement. However, many therapists, including myself, I use this to deal with any tragic or traumatic news. For example, I'll give you an example. Being diagnosed with cancer or being arrested. Okay. Think about somebody in one of those situations. They can certainly go through all this. So I'm diagnosed with cancer. I'm sorry, Dr. Koala, you have 6 months to live. Nah, you're a quack. You don't know what you're doing. I want a second opinion. If I'm doing that, I'm not having to deal with the real news. So I deny it. Then I get past that and I go, you know what? I have cancer. I'm angry about it. Stupid power lines. I knew that power company was going to put them above my house, and that medicine I was taking is a water company. I'm getting mad. But I'm still not dealing with the news. Then I start bargaining. How many times have all of us done this? Oh God, please, if you just get me out of this one, I'll go to church, I'll donate some money, I'll put some time in the community, I'll do whatever. So bargaining, still not dealing with it. Stage 4, depression, I cry, withdrawal, I stop answering the phone, I stop going to work, I start drinking, I start using drugs, still not dealing with it. Finally, after I resolve all of those stages, I finally get into the acceptance stage, where I really am finally dealing with the news and having to make a change in my life, or finally having to resolve some kind of traumatic emotional state. And that is the Kubler-Ross stages of dying. All right? If you have any questions on any of this material, please send me an email. I will be posting, again, that exam review video. There will be questions from these slides on the exam, so please rewatch it, and I hope you found it helpful. Take care, and good luck on the test.